Can you picture that scene? Jesus, surrounded by a group of religious leaders, being interrogated, asked questions designed to trip him up. As I was reading this passage this week, I got some flashbacks or something, or a sense of déjà vu, I think maybe from watching the news so much lately. It seems like often when leaders get together, rather than putting the needs of the whole forward, sometimes these leaders get caught up in infighting and trying to trip each other up. This is what was happening to Jesus in this passage. They've gathered around Jesus, and one of them, a lawyer, it's told to us, interestingly enough, a lawyer asks him this question: "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" Now, this is kind of an interesting question intellectually, I suppose, and I'm told that rabbis back then enjoyed these kinds of debates. They probably still do now. Sometimes I even do. Digging through the scriptures and trying to figure out things and having interesting debates and discussions about things. As rabbis, they would have identified 638 commandments in the first 5 books of the Bible alone. 638, and we thought 10 was tough. And so they come around Jesus and they're trying to trip him up. So they say, out of all these commandments, 638 plus, which one is the greatest? Now there's a question. But Jesus apparently didn't skip a beat. And instead of choosing one commandment, he actually chose 2. "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind," he said. This is the first greatest commandment. "And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said, "On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets," on everything that God teaches us. It hinges on those 2 things, those 2 laws. In this place, Jesus was joining together 2 very important parts of Jewish teaching. The first commandment comes from Deuteronomy, and the second one comes from the book of Leviticus. And taken together, the 2 really are like shorthand for our 10 commandments. These rules, these laws that spell out our duties to God and to other people. Gotta hand it to Jesus. He knew how to get himself out of a tight place. With this answer, he avoided getting attacked. But let's look at that again, what he said, that greatest commandment he gave us. Did you notice how Jesus placed the commandments to love our neighbor on equal footing with the commandment to love God? Together. I think this has some interesting implications for you and me as we try to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." That's the first part. And that part talks about a very intense and personal relationship we're called to have with God. God reaches out to each one of us individually and invites each one of us personally to come into his love, to follow his son, Jesus. God, this wonderful God who cares for each one of us individually. To a great extent, Christianity is an intensely personal faith. It's highly individual. And I think a lot of us, maybe all of us, want that intensely personal relationship with God. I know I do. We're taught that God is always present, always waiting there for me or for you. And here at church, we encourage each other to develop that strong relationship between us and God. And that's good. The danger is sometimes we push it a little too far and we make it into something private. We're tempted to make Christianity just something that's between me and God alone, as if it has nothing to do with anyone else. You know, if I love God, then I've met all the requirements. I don't have need for anyone else. I don't have need for the church. But wait a minute. That's not what Jesus said here. He said, yes, love God, but also love your neighbor. Personal religion shouldn't lead to private religion. Jesus has no use for a faith that has only to do with individuals all by ourselves. Here's the radical thing here, I think. Jesus is suggesting that no person can truly love God unless that person also loves their neighbor. Love of God and love of neighbor are not two separate things that we can choose between. It's not an option or a multiple choice. They go together. The greatest commandment is to love God, and I believe the second commandment, to love our neighbor, tells us how to love God. When we love our neighbor, we are loving God. And we teach each other how to do that. When we open our doors here at St. John's and gather together in small groups and for studies and other activities together, we do that on Sunday mornings. All of us came through that door this morning, and I hope we each felt welcomed, like we were in the right place. But we also have to leave this place, which can be feeling like a private place between just us and God. We also are called to go out those doors at the end of our worship services to show our love for God by loving our neighbor. Sometimes that means inviting our neighbor in. Sometimes it means going out to see our neighbor. When we invite our neighbors into this place where we gather together to worship God, we aim to make it a welcoming place, even for new people. It can be tricky. Everybody has different ideas on what will make them feel comfortable here among us. It's a lot like house guests. You know, they come to visit, and sometimes they tell you exactly what's missing in your house that they wished you'd provided for them. If you have a sister-in-law who's vocal, you'll hear it more than you want to know. But it's also a good thing, because now I know that when a certain person in my family comes to visit, she expects a mirror in the guest room, she expects a trash basket, and she would really like an egg crate mattress pad on the bed. You know, it's not that hard to do, actually. So at first you think, well, brother. And then you think, well, I can do that. The church is the same way. We hear things that we need to do to make it more comfortable and welcoming for people who are new. And if you're like me, you first say, oh, how demanding. And then you think, well, you know what, that's not that hard, we can do that. And then as we go outside, leaving this place to show our love for God by showing our love for our neighbor, we also need to be mindful and to look around and see what needs to be done. It's so easy to get overwhelmed by the need around us that we see. But God calls us to show our love to our neighbor. And together we can encourage each other to do that. This church is so good at that already. This church goes out into the world to show God's love in so many ways when we are trying to help people overcome addiction. When we're aiming to help children have better educational outcomes, we send people out to volunteer in the schools. We see the need for affordable housing, and we go out there looking for ways to make sure everyone has a roof over their heads. And if they have one already, to make sure they can keep it over their heads. Or if a hurricane is blown through, we go out and try to restore their homes or give them new ones. We offer healing in so many different ways out in the world. Sometimes it's just listening that's needed. St. John's is truly blessed to have so many people in it, committed to showing the love of God by showing love toward our neighbors. We have yet another opportunity coming up this week. As you know, we have monthly suppers, and it takes a lot of people to put together those monthly suppers, and there are lots of things to do, but each one by itself is really not that hard. And so I encourage us all, after the service, to go over to Hartford Hall and look at those rolling bulletin boards. Look at the list of things that are needed to put on this supper so we can invite people into our house and feed them a good meal and make them feel welcome and feel the love of God through our love. Jesus said it's really quite simple. All those commandments, we can boil them down to love God and love our neighbor. It doesn't have to be that hard, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. We can help each other step by step. Thanks be to God. Amen.